Welcome back. In this section, we're going to learn about blood vessels of the thoracic cavity. So as usual, let's start with the arterial blood flow. And as usual, we'll start closest to the heart. In this case, off the arch of the aorta. So off the arch of the aorta, we have three major blood vessels, as you recall. The first one was the brachiocephalic trunk, which splits into the right common carotid artery and what we want to learn about the right subclavian artery. And then the third branch off the arch of the aorta, as you recall, was the left subclavian artery. So now we have the two subclavian arteries. And I want to draw your attention to this picture in the bottom right, where you clearly can see some blood vessels going in a superior direction coming off the subclavian artery. And that's one of those is where we want to go to next. And where we want to go to is to the vertebral artery. So recall, we'd already learned about the vertebral arteries in their position traveling through the transverse foramina of the cervical vertebrae. And then they went through the foramen magnum to join together to form the basilar artery at the base of the skull. So here what we are looking for is for a blood vessel that is going to travel upward in the neck area, as you can see on the other two pictures. Now, in addition to this one blood vessel going in a superior direction off of each subclavian artery, there is an additional blood vessel we're going to learn that comes off the subclavian arteries, but it travels in an inferior direction, and it's not inside the thoracic cavity, pleural cavities, next to the lung and the heart. Where it is going to travel is on your anterior chest wall. It travels right down the inner surface of the anterior chest wall, as you can see on the middle section. So this is the chest plate taking off, and you are looking at the inside of it. And in the bottom right corner, that is a model. You clearly can see the ribs and the sternum, and just on each side of the sternum, you can see an artery and a vein that are parallel to the sternum. And this artery is called the internal thoracic artery. It has another name, the internal mammary artery, but we're going with internal thoracic artery. And if you look at the far left picture, you can see that it's clearly coming off the subclavian artery and going in an inferior direction. And you also can see those vertebral arteries we learned about as well. So that's all we're learning coming off the subclavian arteries, which came off the arch of the aorta. So now let's continue the aorta distally, and we are in the thoracic aorta. So the thoracic aorta is only above the level of the diaphragm. And in this part of the aorta, blood travels in an inferior direction. If we look at the thoracic aorta, we would see 12 pairs of blood vessels coming off on each side. And each of those blood vessels is an intercostal artery. So they can be seen just below the rib. If you remember our rib anatomy, on the inferior surface, you had a costal groove. Well, it's in that costal groove that there is a nerve, an artery, and a vein that travels, which you clearly can see all three in the model in the middle. And so these are all intercostal structures, meaning between the ribs, but they are located just below the rib. So these intercostal arteries come off posteriorly, and they will travel laterally and then swing around anteriorly to join up with, if you look on the lower left corner, you can see them joining up to the internal thoracic artery. So this is also another place where we have anastomosis, forming this circle, just like in the circle of Willis. So this is why we actually can take the internal thoracic artery and separate it from here and use the internal thoracic arteries for coronary artery bypass grafting. Okay, continuing on, I know you've already learned about the pulmonary artery, the right and the left pulmonary artery on the heart, but also when you're looking in the chest, please remember when you're looking in the chest, especially when there's no heart in the chest, that the pulmonary artery is containing deoxygenated blood because it's carrying arterial blood to go to an organ system. And so it's going to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Therefore, it's going to be a blue structure. That's it for the arterial blood flow. So now let's return blood back towards the heart by doing our venous blood flow. And so let's look first at that internal thoracic vein, parallel and just adjacent to the internal thoracic artery on the lateral borders of the sternum, on the deep surface of the anterior chest wall. In addition, we have vertebral veins which travel adjacent to the vertebral artery. And they are going to drain into the subclavian veins, as you might expect. Don't forget, we also have a pulmonary artery in the chest, and because this is carrying oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the heart, it will be red in appearance, even though it is a vein. Adjacent to the intercostal arteries, we will have intercostal veins. Now, if you recall, the intercostal arteries came off the aorta, so the intercostal veins will, you would think, would drain to a structure right next to the aorta. But whereas in the abdomen, the inferior vena cava is right next to the aorta, we don't have a superior or inferior vena cava, which is right next to our thoracic aorta. So we have to have other veins in this area. So if you look, for instance, in the bottom of the right-sided picture, you can see the intercostal veins, and then you can see veins which are actually running parallel to the thoracic aorta. And in this lower right part, you can, in all three of these pictures, actually, you can clearly see veins running parallel to the thoracic area. And this is in the right thoracic cavity. This lower portion in the right thoracic cavity is called the hemiazygous vein. And what you will notice in both of these pictures, even though we have them parallel, we still need to get blood from the left side of the chest over to the right side of the chest. And you will notice that there is only one place where blood crosses. So I'm pointing to it on the right-sided picture where they're showing it fairly high up, whereas in the middle picture, they're showing the crossing at a lower level. And in the far left, they are actually showing two different little crossings. So this is how the blood in the left thoracic cavity is going to be dumped over to the right thoracic cavity, which is where it needs to go, because remember, venous blood is going to have to, deoxygenated venous blood is going to have to dump into the right atrium. So I had to figure out how to get over to the right chest cavity. So in the lower left chest cavity, we have a hemiazygous vein. Yes, there's the vein that goes in the upper part. It's called the accessory hemiazygous vein. So we're not really going to learn accessory hemiazygous. We're just going to learn on the left side, we have the hemiazygous vein. And then on the right chest cavity, we have a larger vein, half of which is blood that has come over from the left chest cavity. And on the right side, this is called the azygous vein, which you clearly can see in the cadaver picture on the left, as well as the mediastinum model in the middle. And the azygous vein actually dumps its blood into the superior vena cava. So if you look at the heart from behind, look at those pictures where you were identifying all these other blood vessels and you missed this little blood vessel. This is the very last blood vessel, the only blood vessel that dumps into the superior vena cava. So it's the last blood vessel adding blood from above the diaphragm and then the superior vena cava dumps blood into the heart. And the inferior vena cava, which has popped up through the diaphragm, will dump blood into the heart from below the diaphragm. And with that, we are done with all of our thoracic blood flow. So thank you, and I'll see you again shortly.